Good morning. I'll be reading Judges chapter 13, verses 1 through 7. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord gave them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. There was a certain man of Zorah of the tribe of Danite, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, "Behold, you are barren and have not borne children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Therefore be careful and do not drink wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to save Israel from the hands of the Philistines." Then the woman came and told her husband, "A man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of an angel of God, very awesome. I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. But he said to me, 'Behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. So then drink no wine or strong drink, eat nothing unclean, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death.'"
I pray it comes as no surprise to you that the lesson topic this morning is not about the resurrection. In fact, we celebrate the resurrection on every Sunday as we gather around this table to partake of his body and his blood. If you've been with us over the last month, you know that we have been looking at Joshua and Judges for the LTC convention. By the way, what a great conference that was. You would be greatly pleased with our young people. I'll encourage you to be here next week as we are going to have an awards ceremony and a fellowship meal celebrating all of their achievements. You'll be able to see some of the things that were showcased at LTC. Please be here for that to encourage our young people. We know who that boy was in that reading that Tim just did for us, don't we? That she was to conceive and to have the strongest man to ever live, Samson, and yet Samson's strength did not lay in his hair. And we're going to develop that concept through our lesson this morning. His strength actually lie in a place that he was mostly oblivious to. I don't want to say that he was totally blind, pun intended, but he did kind of miss it as you go through the course of reading about Samson. You can read about Samson in Judges chapters 13 through 16, but Samson was one of those judges that ruled or delivered the people during the period of time that was between the Exodus from Egypt and the time of the kings. Roughly, it's a period somewhere from around 1380 BC to the reign of King Saul's kingdom, which is in 1050 BC. We are told in 1 Kings chapter 6 and verse 1 that entire period in which Solomon reigned, and Solomon is not the first king. We have Saul being king for 40 years, David for 40 years, and then now Solomon for 4 years. We know then that there has been 480 years up until the 4th year of the reign of King Solomon that have transpired between the Exodus, the children coming out of Egypt, and Solomon's reign. And so we have a block of time clearly delineated there for the judges, where they were the ones that attempted to deliver the people. How many judges were there? 15, 14 men, and one great woman. And they were delivering the people from the Canaanites, from the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Midianites, and the Philistines, as what we are going to see from today, because they did not drive them out of the land. The Lord had commanded them, whenever you come into the land, you drive out the people. You don't leave anyone behind. And if you don't do that, you are going to find that they are going to become a thorn in your side. They will become your oppressors. But they didn't listen to God. And so we have the period of time which the children of Israel need judges in order to guide them and basically deliver them. And although we have 15 judges, the book of Judges doesn't include the last 2. And so you have to go to 1 Samuel in order to get Eli and Samuel, and so they're not included within the book of Judges. Samson, if you turn to chapter 15 and verse 20, it says, that he rules Israel for 20 years. We don't get a whole lot of information about what kind of a judge he was, especially, except that we know his character wasn't great, and we're going to discuss that here in just a minute. But chapter 15 and verse 20 says, "So he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines." Does that mean that he sat underneath a palm tree like Deborah between Bethel and Ramah? That's how she literally judged. And if you'll remember, she was a prophetess as well. Or does that simply mean that he worked for delivering the people from the Philistines for a 20-year period, and that he never actually sat upon a bench or underneath a palm tree? He was more of just an antagonist towards their enemy. I'll leave that for you to decide. I tend to lean towards the latter, although I don't want to misread what the scriptures are saying. I just have a difficult time seeing Samson as being a man of wisdom for some reason. He was born in the city of Zorah. You can find Zorah as number 11 on that map. He is number 12 as far as the judges. If you'll remember, this map leaves off Shamgar for whatever reason. But that's where Manoah, his father, is from. And the reason why that's important for us to know is because the enemy is the Philistine tribe, and they live along the coastal plains, as you see highlighted there in pink. And they still live within the plains long after Samson, into the time of David. Remember, it's Goliath who is a Philistine. That's the one that they are fighting. And so we can see clearly the prophecy of God fulfilled, certainly within the time of Samson, but generations later, even during the time of the kings, whenever they are doing battle against those that live within those coastal plains right next to the Mediterranean Sea. Timnah is not on this map, but Timnah is just to the north and to the west of Zorah, and Timnah is where his wife is from. And so he is not actually going too far from home. Maybe this map has Timnah on it. It sure does. There you go. You can see where Timnah is. Even though it almost sounds like he is headed off to a foreign country in order to find his wife amongst the Philistines, Samson basically lives amongst the Philistines. And in fact, it is a very real oppression that is covering the entire land, especially the southern part, and we'll see some evidences of that. It's also the area, this area, where David picks up from the creek bed 5 stones. And the reason that he does pick up 5 stones is because Goliath has 4 brothers. I didn't know if you knew that. But mentioning that, with regards to the men of Philistine, there would have been mighty men within the Philistine army. If you remember, whenever the spies went out to spy out the land, whenever they came back, what did they say? They said, yes, it is flowing with milk and honey, but it is a land of giants, and the cities are fortified. They're descendants of Anak, who was the originator. They are the Philistines, and they live at that time. Goliath, whenever he stands in front of an army, is a Philistine army. I'm only saying that by way of contrast. If giants were there within the land during the time that the spies spied out the land before the land of conquest, and we have Goliath around for David to conquer him, then we have got giants in the land whenever Samson lives. Now, what's amazing is that they don't play any part in the narrative. You don't really hear about giants with Samson, and that's pretty unique, except to say that maybe Samson was too much for even they to handle. You would have thought that maybe some giants, at least one, might have challenged him and they might have banded together. Instead, it appears that the Philistines accept his strength, and they determine to gain their victory through deceit or through subterfuge. How much does Samson know about his purpose? Where is Samson's mind? Well, we have this recorded for us from Samson's own mouth while he is in the arms of Delilah. And so he told her all that was in his heart, and he said to her, "A razor has never come on my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I will become weak and be like any other man." Samson, in a time of weakness, reveals that he has knowledge of his relationship with God, and that he is a Nazirite, meaning that he is one who is dedicated to God and has been dedicated to God since birth. We'll discuss a Nazirite vow, the type of things that they were required to do in just a moment. But I just wanted you to get an overview before we even start that towards the end of his life, Samson has been taught at least enough to know that he knows that he is a Nazirite and what that is supposed to mean to him. Nazirites were forbidden to touch grapes or anything of its produce. And so that meant that they could not eat grapes, certainly. They could not drink wine. They would also be forbidden to drink juice. And in fact, they could not eat the raisins, nor were they allowed to have the vinegar that came through the production of the wine. They could not cut their hair. And this is standard amongst all Nazirite. There weren't too many that were so much a Nazirite from birth, but they wore their hair long. Possibly Paul took a Nazirite vow, because whenever he comes from having completed his vow to Jerusalem just prior to being arrested and sent off to Rome, it says that he shaved his head, and so maybe he took a temporary Nazirite vow during that time. The other thing that a Nazirite could not do was to touch a dead carcass, whether it be an animal or human. Are you already ahead of me yet? How good of a Nazirite is Samson? He was called by God before he was born. He was given a message. Now, there is a little bit of a difference here with the normal judges. God says to Manoah's wife, Samson's mother, that he will begin the deliverance of the people from the Philistines. We don't see Samson leading a great army, and in fact, every confrontation that Samson has is as an individual. We don't see the children of Israel being freed, though the Philistines have conquered them and put them into subjection for 40 years. We know that Samson covers a time period, if we're reading this correctly, of 20 of those years. But in actuality, the Philistines aren't conquered, not by the next judge. You want to say the judges with me? We did it last week. Did you join me? Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Abimelech, Tola, Jair, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, Samson, Eli, and Samuel. It's not until that last judge, Samuel, we have 3 judges involved in this period of Philistine occupation and oppression. God clearly said to Manoah's wife, he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the Philistines. That's what we read there in chapter 13 and verse 5. Why? Is what my question is. Why not just make Samson like Jephthah or Gideon or Deborah? Why not just deliver the children of Israel from their oppressors completely? Remember, I said whenever we began the study of the book of Judges that it's kind of depressing, and it is going to get worse whenever we get into what the Benjaminites do to the Levites' concubine. And yes, I am going to deal with that next week. And it is going to be a rated R lesson. But if it's in there and we are studying through the book of Judges, then I believe that we need to deal with it. And I'll be as judicious and tactful about it as possible. But as we get to the end of the book of Judges, and certainly Samson is a part of that, we see a degradation of the spiritual man. And God is not ready to deliver, I believe, the people, because they haven't reached a point where they are truly penitent of the lifestyle that they are living. Samson begins the deliverance from the Philistines, but the lessons that the Philistines need to teach the Israelites are not yet learned. And God, I believe, wants to teach the Philistines. I think Samson is more of a lesson to the Philistines and their god Dagon, who they worship, than he really is for Israel, because God is the God of all men. And I think that Samson, for the most part, is a lesson for the Philistines. Why didn't those giants get involved? Perhaps because they were learning. They realized if Jehovah is involved, there's not a whole lot that they can do by way of might and strength. Manoah's wife was barren. Samuel's mother, Hannah, was barren. You ever thought about that? They both had judges. They were a gift. And both Samuel and Samson were Nazirites. You think about a Nazirite as being fanatical, at least for that part of his particular vow. He is going to say, I ostracize myself. I set myself back from those things that are socially acceptable. I will not be a partier. In fact, my diet will be strict. I will not cut my hair for the length of time that I am a Nazirite. And if it's for life, then it's really going to get long. But for the length of time that I am a Nazirite, you will know and you can see that I am one who has taken a vow. And I will step back from those normal things of life, like burying my kin or taking care of those things which are dead, like butchering an animal or whatever. I am going to be different. I am going to be set aside. And I think that would easily play into someone who is fasting and praying and wanting to give themselves wholly to God for a period of time because of a decision that they are going to make or some trial that they are going to go through. But to dedicate one from birth and say, this is that which belongs to me, imagine that statement that it would take. If people are used to seeing a Nazirite here and there, and then they're a different person, they're not the same. Now you've got Samson walking the earth since birth as a Nazirite, possibly with long hair. Maybe it's flowing. Probably it looks something like it would in dreadlocks, because some of the things that he tells Delilah about taking the 7 locks of his hair and pinning them together. He probably wore them at least braided. It might have been in dreads. Imagine this guy looking like he does, and I'm sure Samson had the appearance of being the strongest man to ever live. And then realizing that he is a Nazirite. He looks like that. He acts, well, not so much for Samson. He acts like that, though, because God is saying what? We can see it in Samuel very clearly, because Samuel is raised up within the temple, within the household of a priest, and we could very easily say that man is fully dedicated to God. It's a little bit blurred with Samson. Who is at fault? It's not God's fault. God intended, I believe, for Samson to be much more spiritual than what he was. Have you ever abused the talents that God has given you? Do you ever take that which God blesses us with and fail to give him glory for it? Are there not things that God blesses us with, whether they be material or talent-wise, that we use to our own advantage and we fail to use to God's glory? I think we're the same. Samson is just personifying that attitude. Not that that is God's will, but that's who Samson was. God raised up a judge who would judge Israel for 20 years, dedicated him since birth, but he was more of a bad example than a good one. That's not to say that Samson didn't have some great things. Remember, one of the first things that he did was he killed a lion with his bare hands. That's in Judges chapter 14. He single-handedly slew 30 Philistines in the town of Ashkelon. He takes 300 foxes, and you could translate it jackals, depending upon what version you use. He takes 300 foxes and he pairs them together, puts a torch between their tails, and he sends them out into the grain field. Just as an aside, before we go any further, Dagon, the god of the Philistines, he was the god of produce. They worshiped him because he was like an agricultural god. And so whenever Samson ties those foxes' tails together and puts a torch between their tails and lights it afire, and they run through those grain fields during harvest time, and those foxes not only burn up the vineyards and the groves, they burn up all of the grain. Somebody is learning a lesson. And I'm not sure that it's Samson, but I think the Philistines get it. After that, they come to try to kill him. And it simply says in verse 8 of chapter 15, this is not the slaying with the jawbone of a donkey yet. It simply says there that there was a great slaughter. And so he went from the feat of killing a lion, slaying 30 Philistines, a great slaughter. Then the Philistines come to the men of Israel and they say, we want you to bring Samson to us. And 3,000 of them gather themselves together and they come to Samson and they say, do you know what kind of havoc you're creating for us? The Philistines are our lords. They're our masters. You have got to quit this. They asked us to bring you to them. Do you think they're afraid? When was the last time that you heard of someone being arrested by 3,000 soldiers? I think they're a little afraid. I think they're afraid that something is going to happen with Samson. Samson says, okay, I'll go with you. But I'll even let you tie me up as long as you don't kill me. And they say, no, we're not going to kill you. And so Samson allows himself to be arrested by whom? By the Philistines? No, by his own people. Imagine this. Samson is a judge in Israel for 20 years, and Israel ties up their own judge and turned him over to the enemy. Now, that's a man of standing within the community, isn't he? Why would the men of Israel do that? Because he's not delivering them. He is doing what he is doing because he wants to, but it is his own men, his own tribesmen, kinsmen, I should say, that bind him and give him to the Philistines. And this is in the moment that he is, as he is brought before the Philistines, that he shakes off the bonds that he has, and then he grabs the jawbone of a donkey and he begins to slay Philistines left and right. And then it says that he killed 1,000 of them in one day. He names that place Ramoth Lehi, which means the high place of the jaw, or the jaw has been raised up. Lehi means jaw, Ramoth means high place, or that which is raised up, almost like where they would worship their false gods. And so he has great feats of strength. In fact, they catch up with him one night down in Gaza, and we'll get into just exactly why. They catch up with him one night in Gaza, and what does he do? While they lay wait to kill him, he rises up at midnight and he lifts up the gates of the city upon his shoulders. Do you know what the gates of the city are? Those are those humongous doors. You think of a castle with a causeway and the gates that swing outward in order to let the people come and go. And if they are closed, well, he takes that out of the city. I mean, you would have to have a battering ram in order to move that. He takes those off and walks them to a hillside. Did you see where Hebron was in relationship to Gaza, which is on the coast? It's quite a ways. Do you know what he did? He left the Gazans defenseless. Here they are surrounding him and trying to kill him. In the process, he gives them a slight. He carries off their gates and says, you think you guys can handle this? But Samson does have one incredible weakness, doesn't he? Women. Samson is bamboozled by beautiful eyes and a shapely figure. Remember, whenever he comes to his parents, he says to them, I have found a woman amongst the Philistines. She lives in Timnah, and he says, you have got to get her for me. Why is he in Gaza? Well, and ending up carrying off those gates, we'll get into that in just a little bit. Well, he was spending the night with a harlot, we'll just say it. And then he falls in love with the great deceiver, whose name is synonymous for a turncoat, Delilah. Listen, does Samson know any better? I think he knows better. He has all sorts of scriptures. This is one from Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 3 through 4. Furthermore, you shall not intermarry with them. You shall not give your daughters to their sons. You shall not take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will quickly destroy you. He knows, doesn't he? Better than to marry outside of Israel. God's not saying that simply because he wants to keep the bloodlines pure. He is saying because you need a faith basis for your greatest companion. You need to be one with. Don't marry those that are outside of Israel and find yourself being led astray. What about having sexual relations outside of marriage? And this is a writing from the Proverbs. And I thought that was kind of appropriate because of what happens to Samson. And if you are done listening to me and you're a young man and you are there in Proverbs chapter 7, just continue to read through that chapter, because it is as if a man is going after a woman in ways that he shouldn't. Suddenly he follows her as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as one in fetters to the discipline of a fool, until an arrow pierces through his liver, as a bird hastens to the snare. So he does not know that it will cost him his life. Has God warned the children of Israel about fornication, about adultery? Can you say the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not commit adultery? God has warned, and yet Samson is not listening. You ever thought about this? Samson's name means like the sun. He was supposed to be a light. He was supposed to be that which others could rally to and find life. And I want you to imagine now that light in the arms of Delilah. Do you know what her name means? Feeble or weak. What a contrast. Who's going to win that battle? Well, you got a guy that can carry off the gates of the city. This guy who with a jawbone of a donkey can slay 1,000. This guy who can kill a lion with his bare hands. Who's going to win this battle? By the way, did you notice what happened where he got the honey from? He got it from the carcass of a lion, and he made that riddle that he was so proud of. Do you know what he violated whenever he took that honey from the carcass of a lion? What was a Nazirite not supposed to do? Touch anything dead? When he got there, he got 30 companions, and they had a great feast. Do you know what the feast actually means? That was a party. There was drinking going on. Now you say, I don't think that Samson really was drinking along. Oh, okay, but implied means that he went to a party with his companions and got into party mode. What were the guidelines? Don't touch anything unclean. Don't partake of any produce that is grapes. And he is about to violate the third. Now, I want you to think about God's place in this man's life. Is God there? Well, we know that he is there because it keeps saying that the Spirit of the Lord fell greatly upon him and that he did mighty feats. But does Samson recognize God as being there? No. No, Samson can set aside his vows whenever he wants to do what he wants. His parents had said to them, aren't there any good Jewish girls that you can marry? I don't think that he said it just like they did on Fiddler on the Roof, but Samson says, I want that girl. But his father yielded. Now, I have to be a little bit lenient with his parents, with Manoah and his wife. I mean, after all, they do have the strongest boy in the world under their control. Maybe they were a little bit afraid of saying no to this man. But Manoah goes right down to the village and gets Timnah and sets up the wedding. And so I wonder if Manoah and his wife have emphasized as much as they should. Samson, this is not what you are to be about. You can find that there in Judges 14. I have written out on the sign, Samson's strength lay not in his hair, but in the Lord's presence. Does Samson know that? I don't think he does, or at least he's not acknowledging it at this point. And so within the arms of Delilah, she says, tell me the secret of your strength. Probably within the mind of the Philistines, they might have thought that it could have been some sort of an amulet, right? A rock, a talisman of some sort, something that he had within his possession that if they could just steal that away from him, maybe he would lose his strength. But they also have stories about their own gods that have long hair, so they might have suspected that his hair would be a part of it. But she begs him 4 times, tell me your secret. And he says, well, if you'll bind me with 7 fresh cords, I'll be weak. She tried. It didn't work. If you take a new robe, I'll be like any other man. She tried. It didn't work. He said, if you take the locks of my hair and weave them together, those 7, and then put a pin through it, then you'll have the secret to my strength. He's getting awfully close to the truth with that one, isn't he? Now, does he not see what's going on with Delilah? Can he not know what's in Delilah's heart? Does he not know that she's playing games, that he's playing with fire? Samson, I believe, doesn't care. And in fact, I think at this moment in time, Samson has come to believe in himself. Have you ever been overconfident? You ever just know that you can handle it? There was a job, there was a person that you were going to win over. There was a battle that you were going to take on, but you just knew that it was within you to conquer. We've all been there, haven't we? Samson has reached a point in his life whenever he believes there is nothing really that can stand in his way, and now he's ready to do what? He's ready to forfeit because she has annoyed him to death, is what it says there in chapter 16 and verse 16, that he is willing to say, it's the length of my hair. If you cut my hair, the length, then my strength will leave me. Oh, Samson. And so what does she do? She shaves his head while he is sleeping on her lap. She calls for the Philistine. This is now the 4th time that she has called for them. But this time he awoke from his sleep and he says, I'll go out as other times and I will shake myself free. But he didn't know. I mean, how can you not know? Well, he touched a dead body. He partied with his friends. He is sexually impure and promiscuous, and now he even consents to revealing the secret that is in his hair if it just be cut off. How much does hair weigh? Do you ever notice whenever you get a haircut, can you tell the difference? You say, I wish I had some hair in order to tell the difference. Hair weighs, it has some weight to it. Can you imagine having a full head of hair like he did your whole life and now it's gone? And you wake up from the sleep and stand up, you've got to say, whoa, something's different. You're probably feeling like you're going to float to the ceiling. Samson knows his hair is gone, but he assumes that he can do it anyways. He probably looked at himself in the mirror a time or two. We never do that, right? Looked at his muscles and his biceps. And oh man, he is ready to fight. What's happened to Samson? What's the difference? Samson's strength lay not in his hair, but in the presence of the Lord. And the Lord is gone. He was taken into custody. His eyes were gouged out, and he was made to grind grain like an ox. Remember that old proverb that he will be like an ox led to the slaughter. Oh, Samson, Samson. We can learn a few lessons from the worst of them, can't we? The strongest man to have ever lived physically was probably the weakest and the least amount of foresight spiritually. He was made to grind grain like an ox. He was brought then to the place where the Philistines had their place of worship, to Dagon. And so you think about the fact that he's grinding grain. What's Dagon's name mean? Grain. Well, this is a man that has turned loose the foxes, and now he is helping out with the harvest. And he has been giving a job that a menial servant, and in fact, slaves in Pompeii, they have found that this was a common practice in that community. They have found places where slaves ground grain for the society, and it was almost like a sweatshop where they would be. Samson was given that job, and it was a subservient one. And then they bring him in while they are in their place of worshiping Dagon. They bring in Samson into, and they make sport of him. It's not enough to just have him grinding the grain. Now he is going to become their entertainment. How do you think that they had him entertaining if he is blind? Well, they probably kicked him, tripped him, laughed at him, slapped him, hit him, maybe caused him to touch something that was hot. We don't know what they did, but they made sport of him. And Samson, realizing that he was within the temple of Dagon, and he knows the construction of that temple, because the temple of the Philistines, they're all the same. I had a picture of it up there. The center of the temple was where all the weight was based, and from above, which was almost like a balcony where people were able to walk above it and to look down. The temple above is based upon two pillars, usually of stone for the base itself, and then the timber would go up, and then the weight of that ceiling was upon those pillars. Samson, realizing that, turns, I think, to one of those pillars. He says, take me to the pillars. We usually see him, as I had in the illustration to begin with his hands between the two. Maybe that was like that, but those pillars would have had to been awfully close together. More than likely, he probably grabbed a hold of one pillar and twisted it down, and the whole thing came down. And it says that he slew more in his death than he did in his life, that he slew 3,000. Who is this lesson for? Well, it's certainly for us, but I believe it was for the Philistines in the house of their God during their time of worship with a man that they had blinded and subdued. Well, that man finally saw, didn't he? He finally turned to God in faith and said, God, if there is but one more ounce of strength that you can give me, let me do it to slay your enemies. And God does bless him. Because his hair grew again? Well, I think Samson's heart had finally opened to the way of God. This is a prophecy from his ancestor. This is Jacob as he is about to die. You remember way back in Egypt? What tribe was Samson from? And he has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. And where am I at? That's not my... Did I not have the Genesis on there? Forgive me. I didn't get Genesis on there. Okay, Genesis 49. Turn with me. We're going to have to get our Bibles out. Look at verses 16 and 17. Forgive me for that. There was my mess up, Tom. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels so that his rider falls backwards. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. The servant will become a victor. that which is cast aside will become a champion, though Solomon probably wouldn't have been thought of as being the fulfillment of that in the sense of why would a judge be called a snake? Well, Samson fits that bill pretty well, doesn't he? And he is from the tribe of Dan. I'm going to link with the phrase now, Samuel, to Samson because he was also a Nazirite, as we have spoken about. Notice the emphasis on spiritual and the physical. Samson was the physically strong Nazirite that prepared the way for Samuel, the spiritual hero Nazirite, who began the deliverance that Samson began or continued. And Samson was wrought with faith, finally, in the end. The true secret of might, it was in the Lord's strength. What would a Samson be like today? In an individual, it would be one who is overconfident in their own abilities and not giving God the glory and not using their talent that God gave them for him. Does that describe Samson? Pretty much. What would a Samson-like attitude look like within a country? Well, it would be a country basing its strength upon its military rather than upon God and a faith in him. It might take the form of a leader surrounding himself with yes men. Leaders ever do that? As opposed to listening to what God says and promoting his word, they promote what they want and what is popular. It might apply to me if my religion is relegated to just Sundays. If I am in the way of religion and spirituality, all that happens here one day a week, rather than me walking with him throughout the week, I might be a little bit overconfident and thinking that I am the one who is in control. This is finally from the Apostle Paul, a passage that I was trying to get to earlier from 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 9, what he said whenever he had asked about the thorn in his flesh to be removed from the Lord. He has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weakness so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Paul has come to understand the lesson that Samson failed to see until the very last moments of his life, and that is, it is God who gives us strength. And that, in fact, whenever I lean upon God and allow him to be the one who is the source, then I become the victor through God. Verse 10, this is 2 Corinthians 12. Therefore, I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties. For Christ's sake, whenever I am weak, then I am strong. Samson, the strongest physically of any man that ever lived, perhaps was one of the weakest men to ever walk the face of the earth because he failed to see that it all comes from God, and whenever he walked away from God, he suffered the consequences. His strength lay not in his hair, but in the Lord's presence. The Lord would have us to be his child. The Lord would have you to walk with him, to strengthen you, to be an emissary to his people, but we must accept. We are going to have to set ourselves aside and our passions and our longings and those things that are contrary to the will of God, those things that we would give ourselves over to that eventually would pierce us through like an arrow or lead us like an ox to the slaughter. Samson teaches us all of those things. We learn from him like what you learned from Abimelech. It's not so much from the good example as what you do the bad. And so I'll leave you with this. What kind of an example are you? Have you been washed in his blood? And are you walking in the light as we stand and as we say?